Education Specialist here at the Key West Art and Historical Society. Thank you for joining us today for Magdalena and Lamarre's talk on the Afro-Caribbean migration to Florida. The program you're about to see is supported by Florida Humanities, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Florida Humanities funds and coordinates public humanities programs and publications that explore the people, places, and ideas that shape our state. In addition to this Florida Talks program, Florida Humanities provides grant funding to cultural institutions, brings traveling Smithsonian exhibits to rural and underserved communities, and publishes Forum, an award-winning magazine. Private contributions are critical to sustaining the programs of Florida Humanities. For more information on the organization and how to support it, visit floridahumanities.org. So during this talk, if you have any questions, please type them in the text box on your screen, and at the end, we will answer as many questions as time will allow for. So we have included a donate button at the top of the screen, as we usually do. If you can, please consider making a donation. Any amount will help us continue to offer these virtual programs for free. I also wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who made a donation during our last DSS or virtual happy hour with Historian. So Magdalena Lamarre was full professor of history and sociology at Miami-Dade College until her retirement in 2016. She earned a BA in history and secondary education from Hunter College, her MA in history from Stony Brook University, and did postgraduate work in sociology and education at Florida International University. During her tenure at MDC, she co-produced 3 oral history documentaries, and in 2011, she was awarded the prestigious Miami-Dade College Alumni Association Endowed Teaching Chair and the NISOD Excellence Award in 1994 and again in 2012. Welcome, Magdalena, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me for this program. So I'm going to share the screen and we will start our program. Hopefully this time everything will work. Okay, and I guess we'll hear it now, yes?
Everything looks great. Perfect.
Okay, so everyone, hello, welcome. As you see, the title is Afro-Caribbean Migration to Florida. We're going to be talking about the Caribbean area. The Caribbean islands constitute this massive archipelago, which is located in the Caribbean Sea, and it's broken into different regions. The Lucayan archipelago, which is where we have basically the Bahamas, and I think north there, the Bermuda. And actually, I include Key West in that whole grouping because it's part of that island chain. You also have the Greater Antilles and Lesser Antilles. From the Greater Antilles in this program, I'm going to be discussing actually mostly the Greater Antilles, except for the Bahamas. We're going to be discussing, I'm going to look at Jamaica, the Bahamas, a little bit of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, very little, and the Haitian community. So we're going to look at the Greater Antilles. There's a history for all of them, but it's just too much, right? Too much. Although there are Afro-Caribbean populations in all of these islands, again, we're going to focus only on the ones I mentioned. So we're going to have the largest 2 English, Bahamas and Jamaica. We're going to have briefly the 3 Spanish that I mentioned, and we're going to have only 1 Creole, French, will be Haiti. The Afro-Caribbean people or Afro-Caribbeans are people who trace either full or partial ancestry to Africa. The majority of these Afro-Caribbeans are actually descended from Africans who were taken as slaves and brought to the Americas. So this, where's the, oh. And much like the community in general in the United States, where there's been a lot of mixture with culture and intermarriage in the Caribbean communities here in Florida, my family is very much like that. My husband is Haitian, and I have a brother-in-law who is Jamaican. So we have these links that are constant in the United States. It's too loud, the music? I thought it'd be lower. Okay. All right. If it's too loud, I'll get a message. During the post-Columbian era, the archipelago islands of the Caribbean were the first areas and the first sites for what we call the diaspora. Now, yes, that was Harry Belafonte Jr., King of Calypso. All right. He was in 2018, as you can see, listed because of his cult, and actually for cultural, historical, and artistic significance, he was listed in the Library of Congress. His particular piece here, Calypso, this album. Now, he is, again, Afro-Caribbean. He was born in Harlem, New York, but his parents are from the Caribbean. His father was from Martinique, and his mother was from, I don't know why he does that. And his mother was from Jamaica. In the 1950s, he would do what we call a crossover, and he will introduce island music to the United States. And his breakthrough album became the first LP to sell over a million copies. So he was definitely a very popular individual during this era. I don't know why the program moves, so you may see it shifting. We're going to start the program looking at the Caribbeans, but we're going to look at all of the different ways that they came to the United States. So what we're going to focus on first is how people arrived to the Caribbean, and actually look at the first group of people of African ancestry who came. And those people were not brought here as slaves. They actually were Black explorers. As you can see here, they mention one. We're going to look at him later. Estebanico, or Esteban the Black, Esteban the Moor. And we're going to have this combination of Arab and native from Africa. And the reason we have this combination is because we are going to have the Spanish exploration first in the Americas, and they will be part of the cruise. Now, in the case of this gentleman here, Pedro Alonso Niño, he was called El Negro, and his crew, he was part of Columbus's crew. He was actually Columbus's pilot. Now, he was free. So this is going to be looking not only at individuals of African ancestry who came to the Americas first, but who were not here as slaves at this period. Oh, sorry, not yet. Sorry, I don't know why he does that. But in any case, the Niño brothers, he was the pilot, but the Santa Maria ship was owned, the ships were owned, I think maybe all of them by his family, but definitely the Santa Maria belonged to his brother, and another brother served as crew on one of the ships. So he will participate at least in two of the comings to America. These renditions, you can see here, he looks almost like Columbus. So this is going to be a picture relevant to that time, and I guess depicting more European. But this might be a truer rendition because he would have been probably from North Africa during the period of the Islamic, the Arab control of Spain for like 700 years. And then when the Moors were forced out of Africa, back to Africa, you have individuals that stayed behind because they basically had been born in Spain. And some of them, unfortunately, ended up enslaved, but some of them with skills and talents did not. So he'll be among the first to come as an explorer. Another individual that is here, and this is our, as you see, Juan Garrido. He is also another Black explorer. They were called conquistadores, Black conquistadores, and there were many of them because, again, a lot of this population will include free, also enslaved, because the Spanish did have African slaves, but mostly free. He's considered the first free person of African ancestry to set foot in the continental United States. There are two renditions of him here. He came from Angola, and he is believed he came through Portugal and then to Spain. Not yet, to Spain. And he lived in Mexico after he basically retired. We know his story because he made a request to the king, to the crown, for a pension, which he did not get. But in that outlining, he basically describes all of the programs that he participated in. He was with Columbus on the first and second expedition when Columbus first came to Florida, arrived, discovered Florida, the language, he got there and he was there. This one here may be a more rendition that follows what he might have really looked like, because if he was from Angola, he would have more of these African features. Here, he looks more like he might be Moorish. There seems to be some African features, but they're more like the North African or Berber. But it is clear that he came from Angola based on his history. Now, he will go with Ponce de Leon on the second expedition. Ponce de Leon will be attacked by the natives. He will die in Cuba. But he will stay. He will remain, Garrido will remain, and he will then go on another expedition to the Americas, again as an explorer, a Black conquistador, and he will go with Cortés. These two prints that we see him here, all right, walking. He would not have had a horse. He would have been, a minor character, but he was in these renditions. And again, here you see more of a look that matches the Moorish look. And again, here you see a little bit more African, which is accurate, we don't know, all right? But he played a major role in the exploration of the Americas. The next group that we're gonna look at are going to be what we would call the first Maroons. The Maroons were Africans who had been enslaved, brought to the Americas, and then escaped. And this was a very common occurrence. It started from like the beginning in Hispaniola, the first island that was settled in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, Cuba. Jamaica actually has still a community that traces its links back to the Maroon community, and they were responsible. They were basically responsible for the part of the independence, the fight for independence and the end of slavery in Jamaica. I actually have a friend, a professor who worked with me, who traces her family from the mountains directly, the Maroon community in Jamaica. This expedition will be in 1526, and it will be an attempt to settle in South Carolina. What makes this particular expedition different or interesting is that it will include the first documented population of enslaved Africans. They will not go to Florida, they will go here to Carolina, and this will be the first actual attempt to settle this area 100 years before the British. We always hear about Jamestown, but here we see the settlement. Unfortunately, the settlement didn't last very long. The leader, the Aguillon, got sick and it fell apart. It also fell apart because the Native Americans were not very supportive. I think they tried to enslave them or take from them. And of course, then the Africans who had been brought, the enslaved Africans, sided with the natives. And what we find here is that when the expedition fell apart, there were only 150 survivors out of 700. And the 100 enslaved Africans did not return with the group. Okay? What happened to them? We don't know. Okay? They went into the wilderness, they survived, but this may be the actually first group of Africans, enslaved Africans in the United States who acquired their own freedom, right? The next group that we're gonna look at, we know about this gentleman from another set of writings, Nicolas Giovando. Again, I mentioned him before. He is listed as a Moor and he was a slave. So that'll make him born definitely in Morocco. He was an explorer. His renditions are a little different. You can see more here, probably the North African mixture. So this might be a truer rendition. Again, here you see him because he went all the way into the area of New Mexico, Colorado. I mean, he was an explorer. This is his route. You go back here a second. Here, he was another conquistador, even though he was a slave. This might also be accurate. He's wearing here the conquistador. And here we see the dogs that they used to use as part of their attack when they used to go into these areas to conquer. Now, Estebanico will be interesting because he will actually be the first explorer of African ancestry in the United States, and he will explore the entire southwest of the United States. He was part of a group of an expedition that included about 600 to 700 people. At the end, 5 of them survived. One of them was Cabeza de Vaca, and in his writings, he talks about this expedition, this movement, all this time. So we have an accurate picture of this also. 5 survivors, he was one of the 5. And they credit their survival to him because he evidently was very good with languages. In the writings and when they talk about his experience, one of the things that is curious is that he was able to see, he was a slave and he worked, during this period of going through the United States, the 5 people and many of the Spaniards also before had actually been enslaved by the Indians. So he actually saw his master working because his master was one of the individuals who survived, working next to him in the fields as a slave. He will come to Mexico and then join another expedition all the way up to Cibola, looking for the cities of gold. This is where they believe he was killed. The next group we're going to look at now are the actual, what we call Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Floridians, but they're going to come to us in a different direction. As you can see here from this edict, in 1693, there's going to be a major change in the population in Florida, and it's going to increase, it's going to show increase of Africans, in this case, enslaved Africans, who are runaways, but also it will include free Africans in the area. Now, one of the things that we see here is that they're promised their freedom. So we're going to look at this in a little bit. But this will be the first Afro-Floridians. Now, what happened is in this particular period, there's going to be a constant movement to this area. All right, there's going to be this a movement from different areas into Florida because Florida offered asylum. And we don't know how they knew it, but they did. Now, this map here shows us of the areas of the Caribbean. When we look at the history and colonization here, we often forget the keys, but I mentioned that they to some degree can be included in this area, because we're talking about all of these island chains. And at one time, this whole region of Key West and Florida was part of Cuba, where the headquarters one of the headquarters of the Spanish Empire was. So we're going to have movement of individuals, not only into Florida, but then movement out of it into other regions. The first Black Floridians are actually going to be individuals that are going to move in from the northern colonies, escaping slavery from the British colonies. The city of St. Augustine was founded in 1565, and as you can see, it included both enslaved and free Africans. Now, these individuals remained as settlers because they actually formed part of the community of militia. There was not an interest on the part of Spaniards to come and settle in Florida at this time, especially. There was no gold. There was to them jungle. They wanted quick wealth, like what happened in Mexico and in Peru. So you basically held this territory only as a buffer and as a protection. It was a military garrison, and it was very difficult to get people to come here. There was nothing for them. So you could see why it might have been something that would attract free African persons of African ancestry, because they would be here soldiers. They were part of the militia. Now, this first settlement, which occurs at this time, again, includes both, but something's going to happen during this period. We're going to have the beginning of what's called the Southern Roadway to Freedom, or the first Underground Railroad. Now, we don't know how they got the information, but what we do know is that they made sure that they found a way to reach Florida. And it has to do in part with that edict. Now, one of the conditions were when they reached Florida, they had to agree to stay in that region of St. Augustine. They were going to be part of the militia. They were going to protect the Spanish Empire, because this was the buffer zone between the then Spanish Empire and what had become the British Empire, the American colonies. Georgia was not yet settled, but it was that frontier area. So what we have is, especially from the area of South Carolina, these migrations of individual runaway slaves who some way found their way to the northern area of Florida here, St. Augustine. Now, you'll see that, we're going to look at this a little bit later. At one point, the Railroad to Freedom is going to also include these regions because of more, again, the idea that if you did not come from a Spanish territory, you could be free, but also in the Bahamas, because of how close they are, and that the British had focused on the Bahamas during this period. Now, the Railroad to Freedom is an underground railroad. It consisted of this particular path here. And what basically happened during this period is that you had a group of Spanish, of African escaped slaves who found their way here and sought asylum. They asked to be allowed to stay. And when they did this, they were allowed to remain. And this was basically a grant done by the king because it was seen from as early as 1587, it was seen as safe haven for escaped slaves from the French or the British colonies, not necessarily for the Spanish. And the first group that comes in 1687 were 11 enslaved Africans who escaped from Charlestown, Carolina, and they reached freedom. It is believed that they were aided by the Native Americans in the region. It was 8 men, 2 women, and a nursing child made it that far. And they asked for asylum, and they got it. So in 1693, the king decides that this is going to be a solution to how he's going to maintain that fort. So we're going to have a constant flow of individuals seeking asylum in this underground, this new underground going south. Here we meet Captain Francisco Menendez. He's going to be significant again. He's an escaped African slave. He comes from, again, that area of the Carolinas. He arrived in 1724 to St. Augustine with 9 other slaves who had fled also Carolina. The 400-mile journey took them 3 years, basically hiding out in the swamps and forests from slave catchers. He will reach, I'm sorry, not yet. He will reach the St. Augustine 2 years later, and he was then appointed by the commander, the Spanish commander, as to command the slave militia. So at this period, he's still a slave. Now, in 1738, they're going to be granted, the militia was granted unconditional freedom. And this particular area here, the city was established, El Pueblo de Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Moisés. Now, this is going to be basically is listed as the first free city awarded to a community of free Africans in America. Right, so it's very significant. It's still there. It is part of the fort. It was actually a separate fort. It was theirs. They manned it. They lived in it, and they, played a major role of protecting the frontier. And he was assigned as the commander. Okay, the black commander. You see him here holding a gun and uniform. When Africans in the English colonies were not allowed to have any weapons, even be near them. Even free Africans were restricted from carrying any kind of weapons. The fort will become very important as a defense for the area. Today it is a historic park. You can see them here, the features. You see that they're in uniform. This was, they were part of the militia. They were Spanish military at that time. And today they hold renditions. So if you want to go to St. Augustine and to the park, you can actually see the park has been restored, part of the fort, and you can see that early history. Now, this was not the only underground. The underground will go as far as the Bahamas, right? And this one is called the Saltwater Underground Railroad. So it's actually the second one. Here we have the lighthouse point in Key Biscayne, and now there's a sign because this is believed this is the area from where they escaped. And where did they go? They went to the Bahamas, right? At this point, the slave trade had ended. The British had ended it, and the British were bringing into the Bahamas any individuals that sought freedom, that escaped from the United States. Also, where they would capture ships that still were transporting Africans. And what they did was, this was one of the areas that the British actually relocated many of these individuals to. So it became a runaway site for a lot of the persons fleeing the United States, especially in the early 1800s, at which time the United States acquired Florida. And when the United States acquired Florida, Andrew Jackson became president. And if we know the history of his entry into Florida, the first thing that he sought to do was destroy any of the free settlements. There were actually like 6 or 7 free towns, not just Moisés, there were others. And he basically set out to destroy these communities, and the people were enslaved. They were taken into the United States because, again, Florida was not an agricultural area. So what we have is a large group leaving, including people that we call as the Black Seminoles. And a lot of the ones who escaped from Florida through this area went to Andros Island. Those families are still there, right? Contemporary account says that in 1821, about 120 went through here. And a larger group later of 300 escaped in 23. So this was very active for a period of time. The raiders, unfortunately, went into the towns and, like I mentioned, captured or killed. So it became quickly a reality, especially for the Black Seminoles, that they had to leave Florida. They could not remain. Some of the Black Seminoles went with the native tribes they lived with, the Seminoles, to Oklahoma and part of the Trail of Tears. But many of the ones that chose not to went into the Everglades and hid with some of the Seminoles there. And then others escaped into this underground railroad. So this is going to be how, it's going to be a major period of a contribution to that particular region of the settling and populating of the Bahamas with a larger population. We're going to look now at the trafficking of Afro-Caribbean people. We're going to see how they made their way from Africa through the Caribbean to the Americas and then back to the Caribbean. I love this quote, and basically it's something that really shows us of that history, that they often talk about so-called people, Africans, slaves being pulled out of Africa, but it's people who were pulled out of Africa. And this isn't the whole issue of relocating and seeking freedom is going to be part of that idea. The slave trade, and this here is called the Triangle. The slave trade was controlled by Portugal for over 100 years. They had a monopoly. So a lot of the slaves that are brought into, a lot of the enslaved Africans that are brought into as slaves to the Americas are going to come from this coast, which is where we know a lot of the DNA testing is verifying this. They came from other parts, but this is going to be the major region, for especially the Caribbean in the beginning. And it's called a triangle because of how goods will move. But they're going to go from Brazil, and Brazil will then claim from Portugal to Brazil. Brazil was claimed by the Portuguese, and one of the first things that they decide to do with it is they find sugar is very lucrative. So they're going to start bringing in from their slave, because they started the slave trade. They're going to bring in enslaved Africans to Brazil, and this is where they're going to work in the sugar plantations. But then they realized that they had another commodity. In addition to sugar, the other thing that they could do is they could sell enslaved people. So you're going to have Brazil as the first starting point in this whole period of movement, which is called the triangular trade and the Middle Passage. The middle was where they went before they went to the United States. And you'll see that the middle is going to be the Caribbean. So even within the United States, you're going to have persons of African ancestry brought out of the Caribbean, not just here, but it's going to start in this region, in Barbados in particular. They're going to be brought out to other areas. They're going to be sold to the Spanish. They're going to be sold to the French. They're going to be sold to the colonists. And then it was called a triangle because you had the persons enslaved brought in here. Then you had them sold into this region, and then from here you would have goods going back to Africa. So that's where you get the triangle. Now the actual first are documented, and here we have like the early documentations. There's going to be an earlier group, but it's very small. But the first documented larger movement that we're going to see comes out of Barbados. When the colony of South Carolina was established, the proprietors wanted to create this model colony, and they were basically in total control of the area. Their interest was at that time to grow sugar, because sugar was the main product that was producing wealth for all of these areas. I'm sorry, I don't know why it shifts. They were producing gold for all of these regions. And Barbados was actually the model colony for Britain. They basically focused on taking and developing in this particular area the sugar plantations, but Barbados is very small. So what happens in South Carolina is, in an attempt to develop the sugar plantations there, they actually reach out to Barbados, also to Jamaica, but basically Barbados, because that was like the model for the British Empire for the sugar development of sugar plantations, and invite the white planters there, usually sons, second sons, or individuals without any prospects, to come. And some of them will come, some of them with their enslaved Africans, they'll come to South Carolina to establish kind of this model plantation system, which will become the model for the Americas in general of enslavement. So these will be the first group of documented individuals brought out of the Caribbean to work in the Americas, the first Afro-Caribbeans. Now, the reason that they're going to come out of here and also out of Brazil was another one. basically that this time they were not interested in individuals who had been brought right out of Africa. They wanted Africans who were seasoned. They wanted Africans who had been broken. They wanted Africans who psychologically had accepted that they would not go back to Africa and this was their new reality. And this is why they wanted this particular preparation, let's say, and then they would be moved. And that's why I said that this was kind of the stopping grounds. This was the distribution center. So they'll be seasoned and then distributed from here because they were seeing it basically as a commodity. This is what, you know, they were treated. Now, this diaspora of Afro-Caribbean people, now we're going to look at a different diaspora, and this one is going to be more like what we would call voluntary and involuntary, all right? And that's what's going to make it different, because what we've seen before is the enslaved population. Now we're going to see individuals that are going to choose to come to the United States. Now, the reason I say that the immigration is somewhat voluntary is because they're going to be factors that are going to contribute to them leaving. In sociology, we use the term push and pull factors, and definitely the pull, the attraction, the attraction will be the opportunities. And this will be what we're going to see in general in groups leaving the Caribbean. Now, what's going to push them from their countries is not just poverty and limited opportunities. In some cases, it's going to be political, social unrest, violence, dictatorships. And what's going to happen is that even though they may choose to leave, I don't consider that necessarily a voluntary. And one of the things that we're going to see that's very common in many of these groups that are going to be leaving is this idea they're going to go back. They're going to go back. And they leave their countries because they see this as a way for not only them to survive, but for their country to survive. So here's just a quick look at some charts to see at the population growth. And you can see that as of the census recount in 2017, there were 45.4 million immigrants, 10% of the United States population, right, that were of Afro-Caribbean ancestry, right? So that's a pretty big number. More than 90% came from basically the countries of Cuba, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Haiti, and Trinidad and Tobago. Those are going to be, and that's why these are all the islands I'm going to concentrate on. Depending on the origin and period of arrival, these immigrants will have very different skills. They'll have different racial compositions. They'll have different languages, to some degree, different cultures. But one of the things we're going to see that across the board, the cultures will have some similarities because of the common Afro-Caribbean ancestry. We're going to see that one of the reasons I mentioned for them leaving is how much they contribute to their societies. As you can see here, for generations, they have sustained their countries, all right? And this is the pull. This is how these societies have survived. The Dominican Republic today contributes 54%, all right, of the global remittances sent out to support the country. The next country that has the largest one is going to be Jamaica, 21, and then Haiti. So this really shows you how much they contribute to the sustaining of their societies and why many of them leave. Where do they work? You're going to see here that, again, it's depending on the time they came, there's going to be different skill sets. But for the most part, we're always going to have a mix of individuals, although we're going to have periods of people with less skills and less education, especially from certain of the islands when we get to them. Here you'll see that very high percentage are in management and the art, well, not yet, management and the arts. Service is not a surprise, okay? You can see the service occupations here. Sales and office, again, pretty high. Then there's other areas here. Now, when we look at the concentration, look where they are. We already know that New York is going to be one of the major attractions. It was a port, and it was a starting point for many immigrants to the United States. This was a case also for people from the Caribbean who came in boats. You know, they came in ships, and they're going to have the largest population. But notice Florida is really prominent. The second in terms of numbers, but not only second in terms of numbers, you can see other Florida cities, okay? Orlando, Kissimmee, Tampa, all right? So we have a large concentration in these areas, and it's going to depend on when they came and where they came from. We're going to start with the Bahamian community, okay? The Bahamas is the most closely one associated with early migration. They're also the closest territory to the United States. Today, and again, this is going to be Bahamian ancestry. So it's going to include Afro-Caribbeans, not just current movement, but anybody with ancestry, with, like me, was born in the United States, but my parents came from the islands. So this is a population in the Bahamas. Not yet. There, about 2% of the Bahamian land area is arable. This is a big problem, only 4,000 square miles. So it's not really suitable for crops. So the population in the Bahamas is always dependent on the sea and what we call subsistence farming. So one of the things that happens is you have, living on the sea, but when conditions change, then, you need to look for other outlets. And what happens in the Bahamas is another outlet was wreckers. Okay? They would make a living out of the shipwrecks that occurred on that whole region because of the reefs that were not mapped. They forgot to map those. And one of the key places will be the Keys, Key West, because this is where you have a lot of the ships in that region wrecking, because it would be brought from Mexico. They would cross into that northern area. This is why Puerto Rico and Cuba and Santo Domingo also had the military fortifications. This was to protect the galleons. But if it wasn't a storm, it might be the reef. So there were a lot of wrecks in that area. Of course, when they start building lighthouses, that's going to change. Another thing that they do is sponging. They were very dependent on that. And in one period, we're going to see the tobacco, cigar industry. And this is going to attract the Bahamian community. In the years before immigration regulations, we have a massive movement between Florida and the islands. And the main destination for Bahamian labor will be Florida because of the proximity. And also, why Florida? Well, in comparison to the Bahamas, people got paid cash for their wages, right? They were higher salaries and there were jobs available. So what happened is that you still had people doing some subsistence farming, but they would come here during different periods to work in the agriculture. And we're going to see then periods where they work and they go home. Eventually, they're not going to go home because that becomes an issue also when we have the immigration quotas and when we have illegals, because we have a large population that will come without papers. But the Bahamas will become a primary area from where they will come, and Florida will be the key destination. Of course, Key West became a very important settlement. As early as 1790, we have in Key West the Bahamian wreckers, and what we also have is the other industries. They basically stayed here. By 1892, you can see there were like 8,000 of the 25,000 people in Key West were Bahamian. All right, that's a very large population. They will come here for different reasons. I'm sorry, I just moved. There is still a community. I don't know how current this picture is. I was told that now there's restaurants in this shopping area, but they will stay. And from here, then they will move into the second wave where they'll come into Miami. Miami has always been an immigrant city, all right? And the Bahamians will be the people that will make a major contribution to the actual construction of building of the city. This will be related to construction. It will be related to the capitalist agriculture that will occur. And it'll also be related to the railroad. And it is going to be, and then finally the tourist industry. Between this period, 1900 to 1920, you can see from 10,000 to 12,000 Bahamians left the island. This means that what we have in Florida, and in particular in Miami from very early, is this very large population, about 40% of the Black population that was Bahamian. They will settle in Coconut Grove, and these numbers will alarm the Bahamian government, alarm it to the degree that they will start to say, we're losing our people, we're losing the population. And so what happens is they start to look for a solution. And actually, one of the solutions will become tourism. And this is going to make a change for Bahamas, and it's going to be one where we have a massive reverse migration for the workforce, and also a stop of migration to the States. The last major group of Bahamians that will come to the United States will come during the war. There were 70,000 West Indians, which included Bahamians, were recruited as contract labor because during the war, the our agriculture didn't have workers. You had the men going off to war, and the ones that stayed behind, including African Americans and women, were working in factories. So they needed people to do the work in the fields. And they also wanted them because they could always threaten to send them back. All right, and people would come and stay. Now, these immigrants from Miami, again, the majority still live in and around Miami, 21,000. 32% of them hold college degrees. It's a very highly educated population. You see that they hold graduate degrees, and 35% are in business science and, business science. And then we have a lot in high type of service, but a lot in tourism here, but also in office occupations. Now, one of the key things about this population is they're
Come on. Gotta do it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I wanted to say about the Gumbe Festival, it is not the same as Carnival. They're not the same thing, but it is a tradition that they brought over from the islands. It is based on the British society and Christmas celebrations and free time. It's not anything with Carnival. And this celebration that we're seeing here is something that is very popular in Coconut Grove and in Key West. And it involves costumes, and it involves masks, play mask, masquerade. And it's something that is very common still in the Bahamas. We see different kinds of these celebrations in the other islands. The next population we're going to look at are very quickly. Oh, I had to bring this in because they are some prominent. One of the most prominent individuals that we have within the Bahamian community is going to be Dubois. He's a founder of the NAACP, co-founder. His grandfather was Bahamian. His father was Haitian, so we have two islands here. He's significant as being a major sociologist recommended today, but also the first African-American to graduate from Harvard. And here's just a quick view of a lot of prominent Bahamians, but I'm going to move on because we're getting kind of close here. All right, the Jamaican community. The Jamaican community has the largest populations, as you can see here. And this population of Jamaican have been coming here for a long time. Their population actually is spread out through the United States. It's not a current population. We have actually documentation that the first Jamaicans were brought to the United States to Jamestown. When you hear about that group of individuals that were brought, first African people brought on a ship to Jamestown, what they don't tell you is that they did not come as slaves. They came as indentured workers. So they were indentured servants. They basically signed a contract. They sold themselves into this contract. And what they did was they worked for a period of time, became free, and then they took over some land. They were granted land and freedom. So this is the first documented group of Jamaicans that were brought into the United States. They will come in different waves, the same as all of the other group, just like, the different immigrants. But during these migration waves, most of the people that will come in numbers will actually be from Jamaica. Yearly, even today, from 10 to 15,000 Jamaicans are brought to Florida as contract workers. So we still have them working massively in the agriculture in the United States. Okay. Jamaicans in Florida, they constitute the largest West Indian group, even in Florida. Their largest population is in Broward. They have elected, that from the last numbers I got, 2 major Lauderdale Lakes commissioners. Kendall was their original enclave, but that has changed dramatically today. And even Lauderhill has a section still called Jamaica Hill. Now, prominent, I had to show this group because we have actually 2 young ladies and 1 gentleman. There are many prominent Jamaican Americans, but today we have the first vice president, who is a woman, who is Kamala Harris she's of Jamaican ancestry, and Susan Rice, and of course Colin Powell. So we see that they have had some very prominent political positions within the United States. And discuss. I can get it. We can't discuss Jamaica without discussing Marley. He basically is well known as having taken and brought reggae to the world, the same way that Belafonte introduced Calypso. Even today, he is recognized and revered all over the world. And he has become most representative, especially his music, of the idea of the African diaspora and the music. This is a statue of him in Kingston, but there are also statues in many parts of the world. I'll hold this to them. All right, the next group we're going to see is Trinidad and Tobago. I'm not even going to try this form of saying their names. The island is very small in comparison to the other areas, but you can see the numbers are very large for this population. The Trinidad and Trinidadian and Tobagonian population, Trinis, they actually will come here in different ways and will come with different skills. Their population is a little different in terms of identity. And one of the things we're going to see about them is mix. Within Trinidad, something interesting has happened, that they've always had continuous immigration. And one of the groups that were brought in were people from Asia. They call all of them Indian now, but it's actually an Asian population, which include mostly Indians from India, but also Chinese. This population has now become the majority of the population ethnically, culturally in Trinidad. It has surpassed the African population. We're going to have a movement originally of white Trinidadians coming, Trinis, because of the idea at that period that they come in during the early 20th century of not wanting to be under Black rule, because it will be the Black population, which tends to dominate in all these islands, that will take political power. And they choose to leave with their capital and their education. This is a problem with many of these, much like what happened with Cuba. Now, because the African population did not refuse to work in agriculture, at that point, they're going to bring in indentured workers. And this is why you have this large population. But they do identify as, Trini Indian, Trini African, and this is the mix. And then most of the population tends to identify as mixed. And you'll see here, regardless of what the mix is, that this is a larger population too. And this seems to be more the identity among the Trinidad population. One of the things about Trinidad is that, again, among the earliest enslaved Africans will also come from Trinidad. It was another clearinghouse and another seasoning camp. So we'll have a lot of the earliest enslaved Africans brought from this region. Their patterns are going to be also the same. They're going to come in different periods. They're going to get opportunities here in the 60s, and after they'll come because of the examination of the kind of racist and anti-Caribbean policies. So when the immigration quotas increase, then we have a larger wave from all of the Caribbean coming in. The Trinidad population today represents the second largest group of English-speaking immigrants to the United States. And again, Florida contains the fourth largest population. And within the Caribbean population, they have the highest graduates, the highest share of college graduates. As you can see here, pretty high. When we compare them to, you can see the number. When we compare them to other groups, they actually, I don't see the numbers. Okay, they actually have higher groups, not yet. They actually have higher share of college graduates than the Cuban community, all right, which has 25, which was interesting. I think that the Jamaican population may be either a little bit lower or a little bit higher. They're close. Now, again, music for Trinidad, all right, calypso, steel pans, and carnival are major, all right. This year, carnival was canceled, but this is a tradition, and it comes from the Catholic tradition in Lent. It's a Mardi Gras, the same as New Orleans and Brazil. It's a major preparation. They basically say that they prepare until just a week before it starts, and then the day after Lent starts, they start getting ready for the next year. Steel pan is one of the main instruments that came out of Trinidad. This comes from the oil industry, and actually Trinidad is going to have one of the highest gross domestic products in values in the Caribbean and in the world because of the oil industry. And this is going to be one of the major differences in terms of wealth for that particular island. Looking at the time, okay, let's look at our next group, the Haitian community. There's an estimated 1 million plus people of Haitian ancestry. Now, again, a lot of these numbers, keep in mind, will be based on documented. So we don't have all of the numbers, all right? We don't have them because we have people coming in and leaving on a regular basis, and we do have large members of this community that are undocumented. Haitian Americans represent the largest group within the Haitian diaspora because they've gone to all parts of the world, I mean, everywhere. There are currently 80,000, I believe, Haitians, not yet, come on, stop, Haitians living in the Bahamas. So when we look at where they basically have concentrated, it will be in the United States. The population has a long history with the United States. Although he's not Caribbean, he is Caribbean because he came from Haiti, Afro-Caribbean, during this period in the history. I'm sorry, he is Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean. And he is the founder of Chicago, Jean-Baptiste Pont du Sable. I think I said that right, I don't know. This is a statue in Chicago. He will establish the city of Chicago, and he is recognized as such, all right? And he's just one of the prominent individuals that we see coming out of Haiti during different periods in our history. Another group that's very significant was in 1779, we had the Battle of Savannah, and we have actually a group of soldiers that came with the French and fought in the American Revolution. This statue is currently there, what it's, recognizing their contribution. There was about 800 what they call La Francis, and were free men of color from the island of Haiti who volunteered to fight with the American revolutionaries. They came in with the French. Now, oops. And this gentleman right here, this little boy, it is believed that the drummer boy being depicted is actually Henri Christophe, who later became the commander of the Haitian army and the king of Haiti. And he is the second head of state in the Western Hemisphere to be of African heritage. This was, as you see, dominated by the Haitian community. Haitian immigration, it will have periods, all right? And one of the motivating factors, as you see here, was the dictatorship under Duvalier. This will be a motivating. You're also going to have on the whole period of where we followed a lot of blue-skilled and semi-skilled, and we also had a lot of doctors, we have lawyers, we have teachers, we have a very mixed group of the population that will come during this period and this period. In 72, we have then the massive boatloads, and this is going to cause a controversy because there's going to be a comparison and a challenge that why are they being sent back when the Cuban boat people were allowed to enter the country. So this has been a long political and legal contention in the United States within, especially the Florida community. And of course, the earthquake in 2010 devastated the island. And even currently, we have about 55,000 Haitian immigrants who have temporary protected status. Now, the largest cluster, ethnic cluster, and it's actually one of the few communities that has this ethnic cluster, except for the Cubans in Miami, is Little Haiti. The largest concentrations are found in Miami, throughout Miami and Fort Lauderdale, but also there's a large community today in Deerfield Beach and Florida. I'm in Orlando now, and it's growing. The population here is also quite large. But even today, about 7,000 to 10,000 Haitians continue to work in agriculture. Sorry. They're called stoopers because they pick from the ground. And then when they go up north, they're called reachers because they pick from the trees. And this is a constant migrant worker population, farm migrant workers. Most of them are relocate to Florida. They're in different areas of Florida. But this is the population. Now music, I want to do music for everyone. So here we have, this is Bookman Experience. And their music will come from, the name Bookman will come from one of the leader of the Haitian Revolution. And of course, one of the key things about the Haiti that we remember historically, it is that it is the first country, the first group of people who gained their own independence, who not only ended slavery, but acquired independence of their country. So this is going to be, they were the first Black republic in America. And this is one of the significant historical contributions because they will serve as hope and a model for the other islands in the Caribbean for independence. Okay, no music time. And the last group we'll look at quickly, and I think not because we're almost, but I did want to point out that there are other populations in the Caribbean, the Spanish, that have large numbers of of people of African ancestry. The African ancestry, of course, the largest is the Cuban. This, we're going to find the percentage doesn't match because of the Dominican population, because they tend to identify as mixed before they identify as Black. And then we have, within the United States, a large population of Puerto Ricans living stateside, and we see that 15% of them self-identify as, 15.8 self-identify as having African ancestry, right? I'm sorry, 7.3%. Again, this number is touted to be too low for this community. And we'll just do the last music because we have and this. Okay, Celia, the Queen of Salsa, the most successful Cuban performer. This is one of the general major music forms in the United States. Salsa was actually developed in New York City in, I believe, the 60s, and it comes out of the Puerto Rican and Cuban community there. But she will popularize that music, I guess, outside of New York and outside of Florida. And of course, that community has also played a significant role in the music of Afro-jazz, especially during the 40s, the creation of what was Cubop, and this was a mixing of Cuban music with Dizzy Gillespie American jazz. And then what will come out of it, and these are pretty much the founders, developers, and the ones who spread what we call Afro-Cuban jazz, which will be a portion of jazz and a portion, or coming out of jazz and Latin jazz. Anyway, I am done. This is just a list of distinguished individuals. I like to point out, you probably know a lot of them, but I like to point out one that pretty much shocks everybody. Sammy Davis Jr., his mother was Puerto Rican. Okay, so I'm going to end on that one because I think of all of these here, that's probably the one that most will surprise everybody here. Arturo Schoenberg, also Puerto Rican. He's significant because all of this information we have today comes out of his massive collection of history, culture, books, documents, paintings, anything having to do with the African experience in the Americas. So all of this preservation of knowledge, which he started in the late 1890s, he was part of the Harlem Renaissance, will come out of his dedication to preserving our heritage. Mm-hmm. If you want to contact me, you can reach me at this email here. If you want any questions, if you have questions, or if you want a reading list, right, I would be happy to share it with you. I can provide that number again later, but I'll stop right here. Oh, where are we? I can't stop sharing. Okay, I'll just get out. I guess we're done.
So I'll go ahead and open up for questions if anyone has any questions. And then while we're doing that, I just want to go ahead and thank everybody again for joining us for the talk this evening. So when the talk is over and we exit here, a Florida Humanities survey will pop up on your screen. If you do have a couple moments, please take the time to fill out this short survey. The information not only helps the Florida Humanities continue to provide these amazing talks, but it also helps us in the future when we apply for another Florida Humanities grant. If you don't have the time to go through the survey now, there will be a thank you email that will be coming to your box soon, and that survey link will also be there. And then I would just go ahead, if you have not signed up for our next virtual happy hour with the historian, that takes place on February 24th. And then our next DSS will be the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt's WPA in Florida, and that takes place on March 4th. Let me go ahead and see if we have any questions. Lots of thank yous. Thank you, everybody.
Well, I want to thank everyone also for, and I hope that I provided some new information.
All right, so we do have a question. Why does Trinidad have such a large population of Indians and Asians?
Okay, with independence in Trinidad, all of these islands have a predominantly African ancestry, and 90% or more. This is every single island except for the Spanish islands. So what happens is when independence comes in, now you have the Black population coming to power. And in the case of Trinidad, they did not want to work the land. It becomes kind of like an idea that now we have our country, and many of them were educated. You know, there was education. They had access to education. They had access to some of them businessmen. So they did not want to work the land. And they started going into the cities to now, you know, socially, economically, and politically run their country. So you need labor. And this is what happens, especially with the oil fields, because that's going to become a major, you know, Trinidad has not only the oil fields because they're on the same shelf as Venezuela, but they also have petrochemical industries. So these are going to require engineers. They're going to require, higher skill, pay higher salaries. So the Black population doesn't want to work there. They left the agricultural area, and then they needed laborers. So even from independence, but also from the period of the end of the slave trade, you're going to have the Black population leaving agriculture, and then the indentured servitude, which is still prominent in India. India has indentured servitude all over the world, but especially in India. You will bring in an Asian, and the largest continuous one has been the ones from India, continues to be. But they're trainees. You speak to them, they participate in the culture and language, and they'll identify themselves as Indo-trainees. You know, they hold on to, we're going to see that for all of the groups in the Caribbean. They'll hold on to both identities. They're about, I think, maybe between 4,000 to 2,000 Chinese Trinidadians. They tended to be concentrated in business. There's also a large Arab population there. You're going to find that also in Haiti, Jamaica, Chinese in Jamaica. But there's, these communities will come to take over the work or do the work that other communities aren't willing to or prepared to do. I hope that answers the question. Any other question? I don't hear you. I can't hear you, Cassandra.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, everybody, I don't see any other questions coming through, so don't forget to hit the donate button and also fill that survey out right after we close the program. Have a safe and wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you.
I see my daughter actually on the screen, so hi, Caroline. And thanks to everybody who participated and who supported the Key West program. And it was a pleasure presenting this to you.